Before I begin, I'd love to know where you're all tuning in from today, so drop me a comment. My daughter-in-law, bless her cotton socks, or perhaps not so blessed, as you'll soon discover, decided my home, the one I'd shared with my dear Arthur for 47 years, needed she called it an uplift. She thought she was doing me a favor by getting rid of all my old junk, as she so delicately put it. She had absolutely no idea she was tossing out not just my cherished memories, but a small fortune. This is a story of how I taught her the critical difference between fleeting modern taste and enduring, timeless value, and how I made her regret every single condescendingly chosen piece of flat-pack art. It all started, as these things often do, with a period of vulnerability on my part. Arthur had passed 2 years prior, and the silence in our home, a sprawling Victorian that had once echoed with laughter and the patter of our son David's feet, was often deafening. I'd had a nasty bout of pneumonia that spring, landing me in the hospital for a week, and then another 2 at a rather sterile rehabilitation facility that Chloe, my daughter-in-law, had insisted upon. "You need professional care, Eleanor," she'd said, her voice dripping with that saccharine concern that never quite reached her eyes. "We can't possibly manage you at home right now." David, bless him, had just wrung his hands and nodded, always eager to keep the peace with Chloe, even if it meant his own mother felt like a parcel being shipped off. I wasn't so frail as they made me out to be, but I was tired, and the fight had temporarily gone out of me. So I'd acquiesced, dreaming only of returning to my own things, my own space, the comforting presence of the furniture that had been the backdrop to my entire adult life. Each piece in my home wasn't just wood and fabric, it was a story, a memory. The heavy mahogany dining table where we'd hosted countless Christmases, its surface bearing the faint watermark from a spilled glass of champagne the night David announced his engagement to Chloe, an irony not lost on me now. The delicate Hepplewhite chairs Arthur had painstakingly restored himself, his large, usually clumsy hands surprisingly gentle with the fragile wood. My beloved secrétaire à battant, a stunning piece of French kingwood and marquetry Arthur had bought me for our 25th anniversary, its myriad secret drawers holding decades of letters, photographs, and keepsakes. Even the slightly worn Persian rug in the drawing room, its colors muted by time and sunlight, held the imprint of our lives. Chloe, however, saw only dust catchers. Her own home, a new build with vast expanses of white wall and minimalist furniture that looked like it would shatter if you sneezed too hard, was her pride and joy. She often made subtle, and sometimes not so subtle, digs about my cluttered house. "Don't you find it all a bit much, Eleanor?" she'd ask, gesturing vaguely at a room rich with history and love. "So dark and heavy. Modern living is all about light and space." I'd simply smile and change the subject, not wanting to engage. What was the point? She wouldn't understand. To her, anything older than last year's iPhone was practically prehistoric. My son, David, well, he'd once appreciated these things. As a boy, he'd loved hearing the stories behind each piece. But Chloe had a way of influencing him. Or perhaps it was just easier for him to agree with her than to assert his own opinions. He worked long hours as an architect, ironically designing buildings that often paid homage to historical styles, yet at home, he deferred to Chloe's stark aesthetic. The day I was finally discharged, David drove me home. Chloe was unfortunately tied up with a terribly important yoga retreat, or so David explained, looking a little too quickly out the car window. I confess, a part of me was relieved. I wanted to re-enter my sanctuary quietly, to reacquaint myself with its comforting embrace without her hovering presence. As we pulled into the driveway, I felt a surge of warmth. Home. But as David helped me out of the car, I noticed something odd. The curtains in the drawing room window were different. Mine were heavy, velvet, a deep claret. These were a thin, pale gray material. A small knot of unease tightened in my chest. "David," I began, "did you change the curtains?" He shuffled his feet. Well, Mum, Chloe thought. She thought you'd like a bit of a freshen up."
Surprise, surprise.
I've learned to be wary of Chloe's surprises. They usually benefited her more than anyone else. He fumbled with the keys, his nervousness now palpable, and pushed open the front door. "Welcome home, Mum," he said, with a forced brightness that set my teeth on edge. I stepped into the hallway, and my breath caught in my throat. It wasn't just the curtains. Everything was different. My antique oak hall stand, with its intricate carvings and brass hooks that had held generations of coats, was gone. In its place stood a flimsy white shelf unit that looked like it belonged in a student flat. The warm, patterned runner that had softened the sound of footsteps on the polished floorboards vanished, replaced by the cold, bare wood. A wave of dizziness washed over me, and I gripped David's arm. What is this?" I whispered, my voice trembling. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Chloe wanted to make it brighter for you, Mum. More modern. Easier to keep clean, easier to keep clean." As if my home had been a den of squalor before. I pushed past him, my heart hammering, and walked towards the drawing room. The knot in my chest was now a cold, hard stone. I dreaded what I was about to see, yet I had to know. I pushed open the door. The room was unrecognizable. It was like stepping into one of those soulless furniture showroom displays. My magnificent walnut bookcase, filled with first editions Arthur and I had collected over a lifetime, was gone.
Gone.
In its place, a low, white media console with a ridiculously oversized television perched on top. My comfortable, chintz-covered armchairs, perfectly molded to my shape after years of use, where I'd read countless books and sipped endless cups of tea, were replaced by two angular, uncomfortable-looking chairs in a shade of gray that can only be described as depressing. The beautiful rosewood chiffonier, where I kept my collection of antique silver, vanished. The Persian rug, ripped up, exposing the floorboards which now reflected the harsh glare from a new, industrial-looking ceiling light fixture that had replaced Arthur's beloved crystal chandelier. Even my little sewing table, a delicate Sheraton piece that had belonged to my grandmother, was nowhere to be seen. It was a scene of utter devastation, a complete violation of everything I held dear. Each missing item was like a physical blow. My legs felt weak, and I sank onto one of the hideous new chairs, its synthetic fabric cold and unwelcoming against my skin. Tears pricked at my eyes, hot and angry. "David," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "Where is my furniture?" He shifted from one foot to the other, looking utterly miserable. Chloe arranged it all, Mum. She said it was old-fashioned and probably not worth much. She said you'd thank her for bringing the place into the 21st century. Not worth much." The words echoed in the sterile, alien space that had once been my drawing room. My secrétaire à baton alone had been valued for insurance purposes at a sum that would make Chloe's eyes water. The combined value of what she had casually dismissed as junk was, quite frankly, staggering. But it wasn't just the monetary value, though that was considerable. It was the history, the sentiment, the sheer, unadulterated disrespect of it all. To come into my home, while I was ill and vulnerable, and systematically erase my life, my memories, it was an act of breathtaking arrogance and cruelty. She said I'd thank her? I repeated, a strange calm descending over me, the kind that often precedes a storm. Did she now? David finally looked at me, his face etched with worry. "Mum, please don't be upset. She really thought she was doing a good thing. You know, Chloe, she gets these ideas." Oh, I knew Chloe. I knew her far better than he apparently did. This wasn't a misguided act of kindness. This was a power play. This was Chloe staking her claim, attempting to diminish me, to erase Arthur's presence, to make the house her own, perhaps even paving the way to suggest I move into a more suitable, smaller place and leave this prime piece of real estate to them. The fight I thought I'd lost in that hospital bed began to stir within me, a slow, burning ember rekindling into a determined flame. She thought my things weren't worth much. She thought I was a frail old woman she could easily manipulate. She was about to find out just how wrong she was on both counts. This wasn't just about furniture anymore. This was about respect, about dignity, about reclaiming what was mine. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I would not rest until Chloe understood the true cost of her surprise. The battle lines had been drawn, not by me, but by her audacious, ignorant act. And I, Eleanor Ainsworth, was ready to fight. The first step would be to ascertain exactly what she had done with my treasures. The silence in the newly stark living room was oppressive. David hovered awkwardly, muttering apologies and explanations that sounded hollow even to his own ears, I suspect. Chloe hired some people, Mum. A clearance company, I think. She said they'd sort through it and dispose of anything unsalvageable. My grandmother's sewing table, my husband's lovingly restored chairs, centuries of craftsmanship, deemed unsalvageable by a woman whose idea of heritage was a vintage Chanel handbag. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. I took a slow, deliberate breath, trying to quell the tremor in my hands. Anger was a fire, and I needed to bank it, let it smolder, not blaze out of control.
Not yet.
David, I said, my voice more measured than I felt, I need you to get me the name and contact details of this clearance company. Immediately, he looked relieved to be given a task, something concrete to do rather than stand there absorbing my silent fury. Yes, of course, Mum. I'll call Chloe right now. She'll know. He fumbled for his phone, his fingers clumsy. I watched him, a pang of sorrow mixed with my anger. This was my son, the boy I had raised to be kind and considerate. How had he become so easily swayed, so oblivious to the profound hurt this would cause me? Was he afraid of Chloe? Or had she simply convinced him that my attachment to my belongings was a sign of senility, something to be managed rather than respected? While he was on the phone, attempting to get a straight answer from his wife, who was, predictably, in the middle of a very important son salutation, I began a mental inventory. The drawing room was the worst, but what about the rest of the house? My bedroom, Arthur's study, the guest rooms. A cold dread seeped into me. Had she rampaged through my entire home? David hung up, looking frustrated. She said she doesn't have the details to hand, Mum. Some local firm. She said they were very efficient and took everything away, even donated some of the better bits to charity. She sounded quite pleased with herself. Donated the better bits. My blood ran cold. Which bits? And to which charity? A vague, non-specific donation would make tracing them nearly impossible. This was worse than I thought. It wasn't just careless disposal, it was a calculated dispersal. David, I said, standing up, my joints protesting but my resolve hardening. I am going to inspect the rest of the house. You can either help me, or you can wait here. He looked like a lost child. Mum, maybe you should rest. This has been a shock. Rest? I interrupted, my voice sharper now. My life has been dismantled, David, and you want me to rest?
No.
I will rest when I know the full extent of this vandalism. I turned and walked, as steadily as I could, towards my bedroom. My heart pounded with each step. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open. Relief, so potent it almost buckled my knees, washed over me. My bedroom was untouched. My familiar mahogany four-poster bed, the dressing table with its silver-backed brushes that had belonged to my own mother, the comfortable armchair by the window where I read in the evenings, all were present, exactly as I had left them. It seemed Chloe's destructive energy had been focused, for now, on the more public areas of the house. Arthur's study, too, remained largely intact, though a thick layer of dust suggested Chloe hadn't ventured in there, probably deeming it too masculine or too full of old man smells for her delicate sensibilities. The dining room, however, was another story. Like the drawing room, it had been stripped bare. My magnificent dining table, the one that could seat 12 comfortably, the one with the ghost of champagne spills, was gone. The matching set of 12 Chippendale-style chairs, Arthur's pride, vanished. In their place was a glass-topped table with spindly metal legs, surrounded by flimsy plastic chairs that looked like they'd collapse under the weight of a hearty meal. It was an insult, a travesty. The knot of anger tightened. This was not just redecoration. This was an eradication. Chloe wasn't just changing the decor, she was trying to change the narrative of my life, to impose her sterile, meaningless version of modernity onto a home that resonated with love and history. Over the next few hours, David, looking increasingly wretched, trailed after me as I documented the carnage. The beautiful grandfather clock in the upstairs landing, a family heirloom that had chimed away the hours for over a century, was gone. The antique Welsh dresser in the kitchen, where I displayed my collection of blue and white china, replaced by stark white cupboards. Piece by piece, the inventory of loss grew. David, meanwhile, had finally managed to extract a name from Chloe. Modern Living Solutions. She'd also airily mentioned that some of the more robust stuff had been put into a small storage unit she'd rented. Just in case, you missed something specific, Eleanor, though I can't imagine why you would. Her condescension, even secondhand, made my skin crawl. The implication was clear. She'd saved a few token items, probably the least valuable or the most difficult to dispose of, as a sop to my anticipated sentimentality, while the real treasures had been scattered to the winds. Or worse. That evening, after a tense and largely silent meal of toast and tea, the thought of using Chloe's ghastly new kitchenware was unbearable. David finally left, promising to talk to Chloe properly and sort things out. I didn't hold out much hope. Chloe had a way of twisting things, of making herself the victim or the misunderstood benefactor. I knew I was on my own in this. Once the door closed behind him, the dam of my composure finally broke. I sank onto the edge of my bed, the only truly familiar and safe place left in this violated house, and wept. I wept for Arthur, for the life we had built, for the memories so cruelly discarded. I wept for the beauty that had been replaced by ugliness, for the history that had been deemed worthless. And I wept for my son, for his weakness, his inability to stand up for his own mother, for the wife who clearly held him in her thrall. But as the tears subsided, something else began to take their place. A cold, hard resolve. Chloe had made a critical error. She had mistaken grief for weakness, age for irrelevance. She had underestimated me. And she had certainly, catastrophically, underestimated the value of what she had so blithely thrown away. I remembered my late husband, Arthur, once telling me, after a particularly shrewd business deal, "Eleanor, my dear, always know the value of what you hold, and never let anyone else define it for you." Arthur had been a collector, a man with an eye for quality and a deep appreciation for craftsmanship. Much of our furniture had been acquired over years, sometimes at auction, sometimes from dusty antique shops, each piece chosen with care and love. We knew their worth, not just sentimentally, but financially. We'd had them appraised for insurance years ago. I still had the paperwork, locked away safely in my bureau. Or rather, where my bureau used to be. The thought sent a fresh pang through me, but I pushed it aside. The bureau was gone, but my mind was not. I knew what I had. And I knew, with a growing certainty, that Chloe's Modern Living Solutions was about to get a very expensive education in antique furniture. My first call, I decided, would not be to a clearance company or a charity shop. It would be to Monica, my solicitor. Monica was sharp, pragmatic, and had a delightful habit of taking no nonsense from anyone. She would know exactly how to proceed. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. And I intended to win. Chloe wanted modern? I'd show her just how costly the destruction of the past could be. The next morning, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. The grief was still there, a dull ache in my chest, but it was now overlaid with a steely determination. My home felt alien, violated, but my bedroom, my small sanctuary, was a reminder of who I was, of the life I had lived. I dressed carefully, choosing a smart Jaeger suit Arthur had always admired, a string of his mother's pearls around my neck. If I was going into battle, I would look the part. My first order of business was to try and locate the insurance appraisal documents. I knew they had been kept in the top drawer of the Secrétaire à Battant, the beautiful French piece that Chloe had so casually dismissed. With the Secrétaire gone, my heart sank a little. Had those vital papers been lost along with it? I mentally retraced my steps. Had I moved them? After Arthur passed, I had consolidated some important documents. Perhaps, yes. With a surge of hope, I remembered placing a secondary file, a sort of emergency, collection of essential papers in the bottom drawer of my dressing table in the bedroom. My hands trembled slightly as I knelt and pulled open the deep drawer. There, beneath a pile of old photograph albums and neatly folded silk scarves, was a large manila envelope labeled simply, "Household." Important. I pulled it out, my breath catching. Inside, amongst old deeds and insurance policies, was the detailed inventory and valuation report compiled by a reputable firm of antique surveyors, Messrs. Albright and Sons, dated just 5 years ago. I spread the pages out on my bed, my eyes scanning the familiar descriptions. George III mahogany serpentine chest of drawers, circa 1770. Pair of Louis XV fauteuils, upholstered in original Aubusson tapestry. Regency rosewood chiffonier with gilt bronze mounts. Each item was meticulously described, its provenance noted where known, and a valuation figure assigned. As I read through the list, the figures made my head spin. Not because they were unfamiliar. I'd always known they were valuable, but because seeing them starkly listed, item by item, underscored the sheer scale of Chloe's ignorance and destructive folly. The total valuation, even 5 years ago, was well into 6 figures, a sum that would undoubtedly make Chloe's perfectly sculpted eyebrows shoot into her hairline. One item alone, a small, rather unassuming Dutch marquetry cabinet on stand that Arthur had found in a little shop in Bruges, was valued at more than David's annual bonus. A grim satisfaction settled within me. This wasn't just about sentiment anymore. This was about substantial, provable financial loss. Chloe hadn't just discarded old junk, she had effectively thrown away a significant portion of my estate armed with this irrefutable evidence. I picked up the phone and dialed Monica Lipton, my solicitor. Her brisk, no-nonsense voice was a balm to my frayed nerves. "Eleanor, how are you, dear? I heard you were a bit under the weather. Recovering well, I hope?" "Monica," I said, my voice steady. "I am recovering, yes. But I have a rather significant problem, and I need your expertise." I then proceeded to recount the entire sorry tale, from my hospital stay to the devastating surprise orchestrated by Chloe, to the discovery of the valuation documents. Monica listened patiently, only interjecting with sharp, pertinent questions. "And this daughter-in-law, Chloe, she arranged this without your consent, while you were incapacitated, so to speak?" "Precisely," I confirmed. "And she has admitted to disposing of the items, some to a clearance company, some allegedly donated, and some to a storage unit?"
"Yes."
Though I have yet to receive full details of any of it, there was a pause on the other end of the line, and I could almost hear the cogs in Monica's formidable brain whirring. "Eleanor," she said finally, her voice devoid of its earlier warmth, now all business. "This is not just a case of poor taste or familial thoughtlessness. This could potentially be construed as conversion of property, possibly even elder abuse, given the circumstances of your vulnerability. The monetary values you're talking about are significant. This is serious elder abuse." The term jolted me. I hadn't thought of it in those terms, but Monica was right. I had been vulnerable, and Chloe had exploited that vulnerability to her own ends, whatever they might have been. "What do you suggest, Monica?" I asked, feeling a surge of confidence, knowing she was in my corner. "First," Monica said, "we need to formally request, in writing, the immediate return of all your property. We will demand a full inventory of what was taken, where each item currently is, and the details of this Modern Living Solutions and any charities involved. We will give them a very short deadline to comply. I'll draft a letter today. David, as your son and Chloe's husband, will also be named as a recipient. He is not blameless in this, Eleanor. He allowed it to happen. I felt a pang for David, but Monica was right. His passivity had been a form of complicity. Secondly," Monica continued, "you need to try and get access to that storage unit. See what, if anything, has actually been preserved. Take photographs. Make notes. And Eleanor, do not engage in any direct confrontation with Chloe or David without speaking to me first. Let the legal letters do the talking for now. We need to handle this strategy." Yes, that was what I needed. Not raw emotion, but cool, calculated strategy. "Thank you, Monica," I said, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. I knew I could count on you. That's what I'm here for, Eleanor. Now, about that storage unit. Chloe mentioned it to David. Do you think he can be persuaded to give you the details and the key? I considered this. David was weak, yes, but he wasn't malicious. He was likely feeling immensely guilty and caught in the middle. Perhaps a direct, calm appeal from me, without Chloe present, might yield results. I believe I can persuade David to give me access, I said. He seemed genuinely distressed by my reaction yesterday. Good, Monica replied. The sooner we know what's in there, the better. And Eleanor, try not to touch anything in the house that Chloe has installed. Don't use it, don't move it. Treat it as evidence of her interference evidence. The word resonated. My violated home was now a crime scene of sorts. The thought was grim, but also strangely empowering. Chloe thought she was so clever, so modern. She was about to discover that some old-fashioned things, like justice and the law, still had very sharp teeth. My resolve was no longer just a flicker. It was a burning beacon. The fight for my heritage, my property, and my dignity was well and truly underway. And I had a very good feeling that Messrs. Albright and Sons' valuation report was about to become Chloe's worst nightmare. After my call with Monica, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The first step, as she'd advised, was to gain access to that storage unit Chloe had so casually mentioned. I decided to call David directly, catching him at his office, away from Chloe's immediate influence. David, I began, keeping my voice calm and reasonable, I need the details of the storage unit where Chloe has put some of my things. I also need the key. I'd like to see what's there. There was a silence on the other end, then a hesitant, Mum, I don't know. Chloe handled all of that. She's very stressed about this whole thing, you know. She really didn't mean any harm. I bit back a sharp retort. David, whether she meant harm or not is, at this point, somewhat academic. My property has been removed from my home without my consent. I have a right to know where it is and to inspect it. Surely you can understand that. I heard him sigh, a sound heavy with weariness. Yes, Mum, of course. It's just, Chloe's very sensitive. She feels you're overreacting. My entire drawing room and dining room stripped bare, priceless antiques discarded like rubbish, and I was overreacting. The disconnect was staggering. Be that as it may, David, I said, my tone firming, I require access to that unit. Are you going to help me, or will I have to instruct Monica to take further steps to locate my property? The mention of Monica's name, even obliquely referring to legal action, seemed to have the desired effect. There was a hurried, No, Mum, that won't be necessary. I'll get the details from Chloe. I'll call you back. True to his word, within the hour, David called back, his voice strained. He gave me the name of the storage facility. Lock and Leave, a depressingly generic name for a place that might hold fragments of my life, and the unit number. Chloe left the key in my briefcase, he added, his voice barely above a whisper. I can drop it off to you this evening on my way home from work. But, Mum, please try to be understanding with Chloe. She's very upset understanding. I wondered if Chloe had shown any understanding when she'd summarily dismissed my life's treasures. I merely said, Thank you, David. I'll expect you this evening. That afternoon, while waiting for David, I began my own quiet investigation. I called Modern Living Solutions, the company Chloe had supposedly hired. A bored-sounding young woman answered. Modern Living, how can I help? I explained, carefully, that I was trying to trace some furniture that had been removed from my home by a family member using their services. Right, she said, unimpressed. Do you have a job reference number? Or the name it was booked under? I gave her Chloe's name and my address. There was a clicking of keys. Yeah, got it. Ainsworth. Full house clearance, wasn't it? Mostly for disposal. Lady said it was all old tat. Wanted it gone quick, old tat. My beautiful Hepplewhite chairs, my grandmother's sewing table, old tat. The casual dismissal stung, even from this indifferent stranger. Was anything salvaged? Sold on, perhaps? I asked, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. Nah, love, she said. Most of it went to the tip. Landfill. Some of the wood might have been chipped, I suppose. We don't really deal in antiques, see? If it's not modern and minimalist, it's not really our thing. We just clear it out. Cheaper than a skip for the client in it. Landfill. The word hit me like a physical blow. My stomach churned. The thought of those beautiful, handcrafted pieces, steeped in history, crushed and buried under tons of refuse, it was almost too much to bear. Were there any specific items you recall? I pressed, my voice hoarse. Lady, we do dozens of these a week. It all blurs into one. Old brown furniture mostly. Dark wood. Heavy. No one wants that stuff anymore, do they? No one wants that stuff anymore. How profoundly, tragically wrong she was. I thanked her, my hand shaking as I replaced the receiver. Landfill. The casual brutality of it. Chloe hadn't just donated things or sold them cheaply. She had consigned them to oblivion. The small hope that some pieces might be recoverable, perhaps from a charity shop or a second-hand dealer, dwindled. My anger, which had been a controlled burn, now flared with a new intensity. This wasn't just ignorance. This was wanton destruction. What kind of person does that? What kind of person looks at a piece of history, a testament to craftsmanship, and sees only old tat fit for the tip? When David arrived that evening, he looked pale and drawn. He handed me a small key, attached to a plastic tag with the unit number scrawled on it. Chloe's really not happy about this, Mum, he said, avoiding my gaze. She thinks you're deliberately trying to cause trouble. Cause trouble? I echoed, my voice dangerously soft. David, your wife has systematically destroyed or disposed of items that were not only of immense sentimental value to me, but also of considerable financial worth. Items that represented my life with your father. And I am the one causing trouble? He flinched. I know it looks bad, Mum, but... Looks bad. I interrupted. David, I spoke to the clearance company today. They told me most of my furniture, my old tat as Chloe apparently described it to them, went to landfill. David's face went ashen. Landfill?
No.
Chloe said she said they'd find good homes for it. She said they donated things, apparently not, David. I said, my voice cold. Or, at least, not the bulk of it. Not the pieces from the drawing room or the dining room. Landfill.
Think about that.
Your father's desk. The chairs he restored. All buried under rubbish, he sank onto one of Chloe's hideous new chairs, his head in his hands. I didn't know, Mum. I swear I didn't know it was like that. Chloe, she just said she was modernizing, making it easier for you. Easier for me or easier for her? I retorted, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. David, I am going to that storage unit tomorrow. I suggest you prepare yourself and your wife for the consequences of her actions. Monica Lipton is now involved. She will be sending you both a letter. The mention of Monica's name again clearly rattled him. A lawyer? Mum, is that really necessary? Can't we just sort this out between us? We are long past that point, David, I said tiredly. Chloe has ensured that. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have things to prepare for tomorrow. He left soon after, looking utterly defeated. I felt a flicker of pity for him, caught between his loyalty to his demanding wife and his dawning realization of the enormity of what had occurred. But my pity was short-lived, quickly overshadowed by the grim task ahead. The storage unit. What horrors, or what small mercies, awaited me there. The thought of sifting through the remnants of my life, items Chloe had deemed worthy of a temporary reprieve, filled me with a mixture of dread and a desperate, fragile hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, something precious had been spared from the ignominy of the landfill. Perhaps Chloe, in her monumental arrogance, had accidentally saved something truly valuable, misjudging its worth even as she sought to control and diminish my world. Tomorrow would tell, and tomorrow, the real fight would begin, not just for the return of my possessions, but for an acknowledgement of their true value and for the profound disrespect Chloe had shown. She wanted modern living? She was about to learn an old-fashioned lesson in accountability. The next morning, I arranged for my old friend Margaret to drive me to the Lock and Leave facility. Margaret, a retired history professor with a sharp wit and an even sharper disdain for pretentious modernity, had been aghast when I'd told her a condensed version of events. "The silly twit," she'd exclaimed, referring to Chloe. "Thinks she's an interior designer, does she? More like an interior demolisher. Landfill, Eleanor. It's cultural vandalism." Her outrage was a small comfort. At least someone understood. The storage facility was a bleak, anonymous place, rows upon rows of brightly colored metal doors under a gray sky. It felt like a mausoleum for forgotten belongings. David had given me the unit number, C-47. We found it at the end of a long, echoing corridor, the air smelling faintly of dust and despair. I inserted the key David had given me into the padlock. It turned with a reluctant click. My heart was hammering as I grasped the cold metal handle and pulled upwards. The roller door rattled open, revealing the dark interior. For a moment, I just stood there, peering into the gloom. Then, Margaret, ever practical, produced a powerful torch from her handbag. "Let's see what the little horror has deigned to save, shall we?" she said, her voice grim. The beam of light cut through the darkness, illuminating a jumble of items haphazardly stacked and shoved into the small, 10 by 10-foot space. My first emotion was a crushing disappointment. It was, as I had suspected, a motley collection. There were a few boxes of books, mostly paperbacks, not my precious first editions. Some rolled-up rugs, none of them my valuable Persian. A standard lamp with a torn shade. And then, tucked away at the back, partly obscured by a pile of old blankets, I saw it. My breath caught in my throat. "Margaret," I whispered, "shine the light over there." In the corner, the beam shifted, and there it was, unmistakable even in the dim light, and covered in a fine layer of dust, the secrétaire à battant. My beautiful French writing desk. Arthur's anniversary gift. It was pushed carelessly against the cold metal wall, one of its delicate cabriole legs propped precariously on a stack of old newspapers. But it was there. It had survived. A wave of emotion so intense it almost buckled my knees washed over me. Relief, anger, gratitude, all mixed together. Chloe, in her infinite ignorance, had saved one of the most valuable pieces. Perhaps its sheer size and weight had deterred her from simply tossing it onto the clearance company's lorry. Or perhaps, in some tiny, uncharacteristic flicker of doubt, she'd thought it looked too fancy to be mere junk. Whatever the reason, it was here. "Well, I'll be," Margaret murmured, shining the torch more closely on the intricate marquetry. "The woman's an imbecile. This is museum quality, Eleanor." We spent the next hour carefully examining the contents of the unit. Alongside the secrétaire, we found a few other notable survivors. My grandmother's sewing table, its delicate legs thankfully intact, though its polished surface was scratched. A large, ornate gilt mirror that had hung in the hallway. 2 of the 12 Chippendale-style dining chairs, one with a broken arm, carelessly stacked on top of each other. It was a fraction of what had been taken, a heartbreakingly small fraction, but it was something. These pieces, at least, had escaped the landfill. Each salvaged item felt like a small victory, a tiny spark of defiance against Chloe's campaign of erasure. I took meticulous photographs of everything, noting the condition of each piece, the careless way they had been stored. This was all evidence, as Monica had said. Evidence of neglect, of disrespect, of value callously disregarded. As we were about to leave, my eye caught something else, tucked behind a dusty curtain. It was a small, rather plain wooden box. I didn't recognize it immediately. Curious, I pulled it out. It was surprisingly heavy. I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on faded velvet, was Arthur's collection of antique dueling pistols. Not something Chloe would ever have understood or appreciated. They were valuable, certainly, but more than that, they were a part of Arthur's history, his quiet passion. He'd rarely shown them to anyone but me and David, when David was a boy. Chloe must have simply seen an old box and had it thrown in here, out of sight, out of mind. The irony was not lost on me. She had sought to disarm me by stripping away my past, yet here were actual weapons, symbols of a bygone era of honor and retribution, saved by her own ignorance. Loading the few truly valuable items carefully into Margaret's estate car, primarily the secrétaire, which we wrapped in every blanket we could find, felt like a rescue mission. The rest, the miscellaneous boxes and the broken chair, I would deal with later. For now, the priority was securing the most significant pieces. Back at my house, the sight of Chloe's sterile, modern furniture in my drawing room was even more jarring after seeing my own beautiful things crammed into that depressing storage unit. The contrast was an affront. But now, my secrétaire stood in my bedroom, a defiant outpost of taste and history in a house that had been temporarily colonized by bad taste. Later that day, Monica's letter arrived, delivered by courier, addressed to both David and Chloe. I had a copy, of course. It was a masterpiece of legal precision and thinly veiled threat. It formally demanded the immediate return of all items listed in an attached schedule taken from Messrs. Albright and Sons valuation, an accounting of the whereabouts of any missing items, and full financial restitution for anything damaged or irretrievably lost. It gave them 7 days to comply, failing which, legal proceedings would be initiated without further notice. The letter also explicitly mentioned the unauthorized removal of property under distressing circumstances and hinted at the potential for claims beyond mere monetary value, alluding to emotional distress and the flagrant disregard for familial respect and property rights. I read it with a grim satisfaction. This was not the letter of a frail, weeping old woman. This was the opening salvo from a woman who knew her rights and the value of what had been taken from her. The ball was now firmly in Chloe's court. Or rather, in her stark, minimalist, and soon-to-be very expensive court. I imagined her reading it, her perfectly made-up face contorting in disbelief, then anger, then perhaps, just perhaps, a dawning flicker of fear. She had dismissed my furniture as old tat. She was about to learn that this old tat had a voice, and it spoke the language of lawyers and significant financial liability. The quiet satisfaction I felt was immense. It wasn't just about the money, though the sums involved were, as Monica had dryly noted, not insignificant. It was about the principle.
It was about respect.
It was about the fact that Chloe had assumed she could walk all over me, and she was about to discover I had a backbone of tempered steel, much like the fine craftsmanship she so clearly failed to appreciate. The game was afoot, and I was holding some surprisingly strong cards, thanks in no small part to Chloe's own breathtaking arrogance. She had sown the wind. She was about to reap the whirlwind. And I, Eleanor Ainsworth, would be there to watch. The 7 days stipulated in Monica's letter crawled by with agonizing slowness, yet also with a strange sense of anticipation. I heard nothing directly from David or Chloe. The silence from their end was telling. I imagined frantic phone calls, hushed arguments, perhaps even Chloe attempting to dismiss Monica's letter as a bluff. I knew my daughter-in-law well enough to predict she wouldn't capitulate easily. Her pride, as inflated and fragile as one of those oversized white sofas she admired, would demand she fight, or at least try to justify her actions. During this week, I focused on my own well-being and on documenting everything. With Margaret's help, I carefully cleaned and inspected the secrétaire and the other few pieces I'd retrieved from the storage unit. The scratches on my grandmother's sewing table were superficial, thankfully, and a good French polisher could restore its luster. The secrétaire itself, despite its ordeal, was remarkably resilient. Its intricate marquetry was intact, its brass fittings only slightly tarnished. Opening its familiar drawers, smelling the faint scent of old wood and beeswax, was like welcoming back a piece of my soul. I even found, tucked away in one of its secret compartments, a small, faded photograph of Arthur and me on our honeymoon in Venice, young and full of dreams. Holding it brought tears to my eyes, but they were tears of poignant memory, not the bitter tears of loss I had shed earlier. This desk was a tangible link to him, a vessel of our shared history, and Chloe had almost consigned it to oblivion out of sheer, contemptuous ignorance. The thought refueled my resolve. On the 5th day, David called. His voice was strained, hesitant. Mom, he began, Chloe got your lawyer's letter. She's well. She's very upset, is she? I replied, my voice cool. I imagine she might be. Perhaps now she understands the gravity of what she has done. She says it's all a misunderstanding, David stammered. She says she was only trying to help. She thinks you're being vindictive. That was rich, coming from the woman who had systematically dismantled my home and my heritage. David, I said patiently, this is not about vindictiveness. This is about accountability. Your wife took it upon herself to dispose of my property of significant value, without my consent. That has consequences. The letter from Monica is quite clear on that. There was a pause. I could hear faint, muffled sounds in the background. Chloe's voice, sharp and indignant. David was clearly not alone. Look, Mom, he said, his voice dropping lower. Chloe wants to talk to you. To explain. She thinks if she can just talk to you, you'll understand and call off the lawyers. I considered this. Monica had advised against direct confrontation, but a carefully managed conversation, on my terms, might be revealing. Very well, David, I said. Chloe can come here, to my house, tomorrow afternoon at 2 o'clock. She can come alone. You are not to accompany her. And she should be prepared to listen, not just to talk, alone. David sounded alarmed. She won't like that. That is not my concern, I replied. Those are my terms. 2 o'clock tomorrow. Alone. I hung up, a sense of grim anticipation settling over me. Chloe, on my territory, without David to run interference for her. This would be interesting. I spent the rest of the day preparing, not by tidying or baking. The thought of offering Chloe hospitality in her ghastly new dining room was laughable, but by arranging my thoughts, my arguments. I placed the valuation report from Messrs. Albright and Sons conspicuously on the coffee table in the drawing room, one of Chloe's stark, minimalist coffee tables, ironically. I also placed a few of the photographs I had taken at the storage unit beside it, showing the careless, damaging way my precious items had been stored. Let her see the evidence of her handiwork. The next day, precisely at 2 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I steeled myself and opened it. Chloe stood on the doorstep, impeccably dressed in some designer ensemble that probably cost more than my grandmother's sewing table, though it possessed none of its charm or lasting value. Her expression was a carefully constructed mask of aggrieved innocence. Eleanor, she said, her voice smooth as silk. Thank you for seeing me. She swept into the hallway, her eyes flicking around, no doubt assessing the damage I had done by, presumably, not immediately falling in love with her IKEA-inspired vision. She paused at the entrance to the drawing room, her gaze falling on the papers on the coffee table. I saw a flicker of something in her eyes, annoyance? Or perhaps the first dawning of unease. Please sit down, Chloe, I said, gesturing to one of the uncomfortable gray armchairs she had chosen. I remained standing. I wanted the advantage of height, however small. Chloe perched on the edge of the chair, arranging her skirt. She didn't look at the papers on the table, though I knew she was aware of them. Eleanor, she began, her tone one of forced patience, I really think this has all been blown out of proportion. I was only trying to help you. This place was so cluttered, so dark. I wanted to give you a fresh start, something modern and easy to manage. A fresh start? I repeated, my voice dangerously quiet. By disposing of my life's possessions, Chloe? By throwing away heirlooms and items of immense personal and financial value as if they were common rubbish. Her perfectly lipsticked mouth tightened. I didn't know they were valuable. How was I supposed to know? It all just looked like old junk to me. Honestly, Eleanor, most people would be grateful for such a transformation. I spent a lot of time and effort on this. Effort better spent elsewhere, clearly, I retorted. You didn't know their value? Did it not occur to you to ask me, Chloe? Did it not cross your mind that items accumulated over a lifetime by your husband's parents might hold some significance beyond their surface appearance to your untrained eye? Untrained eye, she bristled, the mask of composure slipping. I have excellent taste, Eleanor. Everyone says so. That old furniture was depressing. It was weighing you down. My furniture, I said, my voice like ice. was a testament to a life well lived, a marriage well loved, and a heritage I intended to pass on. It was certainly not weighing me down. What is weighing me down, Chloe, is your breathtaking arrogance and disrespect. I gestured towards the coffee table. Perhaps you should look at these documents. They might prove illuminating. Reluctantly, she picked up the valuation report. Her eyes scanned the first page, then the second. I watched as the color drained from her face. Her perfectly manicured hand, holding the report, began to tremble slightly. She flicked through the pages, her expression shifting from annoyance to disbelief, and then, unmistakably, to horror. The figures, the detailed descriptions, the sheer weight of evidence, it was clearly far more than she had anticipated. This can't be right, she stammered, looking up at me, her earlier confidence completely shattered. These prices, they're ridiculous. It's just old furniture. It is, I said calmly. What is known as antique furniture, Chloe? Pieces of history, craftsmanship, and yes, significant monetary worth. The kind of worth that you, in your infinite wisdom, consign to landfill or to a dusty, damaging storage unit. I then picked up the photographs from the storage unit. This, I said, holding up a picture of my secrétaire crammed against a metal wall, is how you treated a piece worth more than your car. And this, showing a photo of the broken Chippendale chair, is the result of your careful handling. Chloe stared at the photographs, speechless. The fight had completely gone out of her. She looked smaller, somehow deflated. The designer clothes suddenly seemed like a costume on a very frightened actress. I didn't know, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I thought I was helping. You thought you were taking control, Chloe. I corrected her. You thought I was old and frail, and wouldn't fight back. You underestimated me. And you certainly underestimated the value of what you so casually destroyed. The silence in the room was thick, broken only by Chloe's shallow breathing. The power dynamic had shifted entirely. She was no longer the confident, condescending daughter-in-law. She was a woman facing the severe consequences of her actions. And this, I knew, was only the beginning of her education. The invoice for her uplift was about to be presented, and it would be a very, very expensive one. Chloe sat there, staring at the valuation report as if it were a venomous snake. The bravado had entirely evaporated, replaced by a pale, shocked silence. But some of it was donated. She finally managed, her voice thin. To charity. Good charities. That must count for something. Which charities, Chloe? I asked, my tone unwavering. And what, precisely, was donated? Do you have receipts? Records? Because Modern Living Solutions informed me that the bulk of my furniture, the old tat as you apparently described it, went directly to landfill. Are they mistaken? Her eyes darted around the room. Anywhere but at me. I think they took some boxes. Clothes, bric-a-brac. The clearance people handled it. They said they donate usable items. Usable items, I repeated. And my George III mahogany chest of drawers, circa 1770? Was that deemed usable bric-a-brac? Or did that join the old tat in the landfill, Chloe? She winced at the mention of the specific piece, its impressive valuation no doubt still fresh in her mind from the report she clutched. I don't remember every single item, Eleanor. It was a lot of stuff. Indeed, it was, I said. A lot of valuable stuff. Stuff that belonged to me. Stuff that Monica's letter clearly itemizes. And for which you, and David I might add, are now legally responsible for either returning in its original condition or providing full financial compensation for its current market value, plus damages for the distress and inconvenience caused. The mention of David seemed to prickle her. It's not fair to drag David into this. He had nothing to do with the actual decisions. I organized it all. I thought I was doing a good thing, making the house better for you, and for when he might inherit it. Ah, there it was. The slip. The underlying motive, perhaps. Making the house better for when her husband might inherit it. Clearing out the old, troublesome mother's clutter to make way for their eventual takeover. Her eyes widened slightly as she realized what she'd said. I let the silence hang for a moment, her words echoing in the sterile space she had created. So, this uplift was also a preliminary step in estate management, was it, Chloe? I asked softly. Streamlining my assets for your future convenience. She flushed a deep, unbecoming red.
No.
That's not what I meant. I just meant eventually this is a big house for one person. We were worried about you. Were you worried about me when you hired a company that specializes in landfill clearances, Chloe? I pressed. Were you worried about me when you failed to consult me, your mother-in-law, the actual owner of these possessions, before destroying them? Or were you perhaps hoping I'd be too frail, too grief-stricken, too out of it to notice or care? She had no answer. She just stared down at her expensive shoes, her shoulders slumped. The fight was completely gone. In its place was the dawning, horrifying realization of the mess she had created, not just for herself, but for David too. Because despite her attempt to shield him, Monica's letter had made it clear that he, as a resident of my property during the events and as her husband, bore a degree of responsibility. Monica Lipton expects a full response to her letter by the end of tomorrow, Chloe. I stated, my voice firm but devoid of the overt anger I'd felt earlier. Now, it was just a cold, hard statement of fact. That response needs to include a concrete plan for the retrieval of any items not yet located, access to inspect anything allegedly donated, and a proposal for the compensation of all lost or damaged goods as per the valuation. Failure to provide a satisfactory response will result in Monica initiating legal proceedings without further delay. I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. And Chloe, I added, you should understand that I didn't know it was valuable is not a legal defense. It is merely an admission of profound ignorance and, frankly, breathtaking arrogance. She finally looked up, her eyes wide and, for the first time, holding a flicker of genuine fear, perhaps even a sliver of remorse, though I suspected the fear was predominantly for the financial implications. What do you want me to do? She whispered. It was the first time she had asked, rather than told. I want my belongings back, Chloe, I said simply. Those that can be recovered. And for those that cannot, I want their full value. I want you to understand the magnitude of what you have done. This isn't just about furniture.
It's about respect.
It's about legacy. It's about the fact that you treated me and my history with contempt. I walked over to the window, looking out at my garden, which thankfully Chloe hadn't yet decided to modernize, with plastic turf and concrete gnomes. You have until tomorrow evening to discuss this with David and formulate your response to Monica. I suggest you use that time wisely. And perhaps, I added, turning back to face her, you might consider consulting your own solicitor. You are going to need one. The fight had been long and draining, but as Chloe finally rose, defeated and pale, and practically scuttled out of my house without another word, I felt a profound sense of vindication. It wasn't a joyful feeling, not exactly. There was a deep sadness for the beautiful things lost forever to landfill, for the damage done to my relationship with my son. But there was also a quiet satisfaction in knowing that I had stood up for myself, for Arthur's memory, and for the value of a life well lived. Chloe had sought to erase my past, to diminish me. Instead, she had revealed her own shallowness and ignorance, and in doing so, she had inadvertently empowered me. The battle wasn't over, but a significant victory had been won. She knew, now, that the old junk had a price, and she was going to pay it. The day after my confrontation with Chloe, Monica received a communication. Not from Chloe, but from a solicitor representing both Chloe and David. It was a cautious, carefully worded letter, acknowledging receipt of our demands and requesting a short extension to properly assess the situation and formulate a comprehensive response regarding the missing items and potential compensation. Monica, after consulting with me, granted them a further 7 days, but made it clear that our patience was not infinite and that full cooperation was expected. They're taking it seriously, Eleanor, Monica had said over the phone. The mention of specific valuations and the clear legal standing has obviously hit home. Chloe's little surprise is turning into a rather expensive nightmare for them, and so began a period of tense negotiation and painstaking investigation. Chloe, now under duress and the guidance of her own legal counsel, was forced to cooperate in trying to trace the disposed items. It was a grim and largely fruitless endeavor for many of the pieces. The manager of Modern Living Solutions, when pressed by solicitors, confirmed his earlier statement to me. The vast majority of the furniture from my drawing room and dining room, deemed unsalvageable mixed waste by their crew based on Chloe's instructions that it was all old rubbish she wanted gone, had indeed been sent to a commercial landfill site. The chances of recovering anything identifiable, let alone intact, were virtually nil. My heart ached for those lost treasures, the patina of centuries, the craftsmanship, the memories, all buried under tons of modern refuse. There was no reclaiming them. Chloe also provided a list, vague and poorly remembered, of charities she thought the clearance company might have passed some smaller items to. It led to a series of frustrating phone calls and dead ends. A box of old linens here, some chipped crockery there, nothing of significant value, nothing from the Albright and Sons valuation list. It became increasingly clear that her claim of donating the better bits had been largely a self-serving fiction, an attempt to paint her actions in a more favorable light. The only items of real value that had been spared were those few pieces I had rescued from the storage unit. My beloved secrétaire, my grandmother's sewing table, the gilt mirror, the 2 damaged dining chairs, and Arthur's dueling pistols. Their survival felt like a small miracle in the midst of such widespread destruction. David, during this period, was a shadow of his former self. He called me once, his voice heavy with remorse. "Mum, I am so sorry. I never imagined. I just went along with Chloe. I didn't think. I should have protected your things, protected you. I've been such a fool." His apology felt genuine, born of a deep and painful realization of his own culpability and weakness. I listened, my anger towards him softened by a mother's weary sorrow. "David," I said, "your inaction had consequences, severe ones. This has been devastating for me. But what's done is done. Now it's about how we move forward and how amends are made." Chloe, I heard through the grapevine of legal correspondence, was not handling the pressure well. The prospect of a huge financial settlement, coupled with a public humiliation should this ever become widely known in her social circle, a fear I knew would motivate her more than any genuine remorse, was apparently causing her considerable distress. Good, I thought, with a touch of unchristian satisfaction. Let her feel a fraction of the distress she had inflicted upon me. The negotiations, therefore, centered on financial compensation for the lost items, based on the Albright and Sons valuation, adjusted for current market rates. Monica was a formidable negotiator, and Chloe and David's solicitor, clearly aware of the weakness of their client's position, seemed eager to reach a settlement rather than risk a costly and potentially embarrassing court case. The final figure agreed upon was substantial. It wouldn't bring back the lost heirlooms, the tangible pieces of my history with Arthur, but it was a clear, unequivocal acknowledgement of their worth and the wrong that had been done to me. It was, in essence, the price of Chloe's ignorance and arrogance. The day the settlement funds were transferred into my account, I felt a strange mixture of emotions. There was relief, certainly. There was a sense of justice having been served, at least in a financial sense. But there was also a lingering sadness for what could never be replaced. No amount of money could bring back the specific grain of wood in Arthur's desk or the way the light caught the crystal drops of the chandelier he'd so lovingly installed. That evening, David came to see me alone. He looked older, tired, the carefree confidence he once possessed now entirely gone. He handed me a small, clumsily wrapped parcel. "This isn't much, Mum," he said, his voice husky. "But Chloe and I, well, mostly I wanted you to have it." I unwrapped it. Inside was a beautifully bound first edition of Proust's Remembrance of Things Past. It was one of the books from my collection, one that had been listed as missing, presumed lost. "We found it," David explained. Chloe had taken a few books she thought looked intellectual to display on those awful white shelves in our spare room. She'd forgotten about them. This was one of them, Remembrance of Things Past. The irony was potent. "Thank you, David," I said, my voice softer than I expected. It was a small gesture, but in its own way, significant. It was an admission, a peace offering. Mom, he continued, twisting his hands, Chloe, she's learned a very hard lesson. We both have. This whole thing, it's cost us a lot, not just financially. Our marriage is under a lot of strain, I nodded slowly. I could imagine. A blow like this, born of such profound misjudgment and disrespect on Chloe's part, would shake any relationship to its core. What she did was unforgivable in many ways, David, I said. But perhaps, if she truly learns from this, if you both learn from this, then some good may yet come of it. Humility is a hard teacher, but a thorough one. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a sorrow that mirrored my own. Will you ever be able to forgive her? To forgive me? Forgiveness, David, I said, is a journey, not a destination. What Chloe did cut very deep. And your part in it, your willingness to stand by and let it happen, that hurt me more than you can know. It will take time. A lot of time, he nodded, accepting my words. There were no easy answers, no quick fixes for the damage that had been wrought. The financial settlement was one thing, the emotional and relational fallout was quite another. As he left, I felt a profound weariness, but also a sense of closure. The fight was over. I had defended my home, my heritage, and my dignity. I had made Chloe and David accountable. And in doing so, I had reclaimed not just my possessions or their monetary equivalent, but also my own strength and peace of mind. The modern furniture Chloe had installed was, of course, the first thing to go. I hired a reputable company, not Modern Living Solutions, to remove every last stick of it. Some of it, ironically, I donated to a charity that helped furnish homes for people starting over. Perhaps it would find a better purpose there. My house felt empty for a while, echoing with the ghosts of what had been lost. But it also felt clean, purged of Chloe's unwelcome influence. And slowly, carefully, I began to refill it, not with exact replicas of what was gone, that would be impossible, but with pieces that spoke to me, pieces that had their own stories, their own beauty. My secrétaire took pride of place in my study, no longer in the bedroom. My grandmother's sewing table sat by the window, its surface gleaming once more after a visit to a skilled restorer. The gilt mirror hung in the hall, reflecting a home that was once again mine. It wasn't the same. It could never be the same. But it was a new beginning, a testament to resilience, and a quiet reminder that true value, like true strength, often lies hidden beneath an unassuming surface, waiting to be recognized by those with the eyes to see and the heart to understand. Chloe, I suspect, would never truly understand, but she would certainly never forget the lesson she had learned. And that in itself was a form of justice.